All right, welcome to another episode of the It Starts With You podcast. I am so excited to have Gabby Rosely on the podcast today. Gabby, thank you for joining me.
Julie, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited for our episode.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited for our conversation. So we're like more recent acquaintances. We met through a mutual connection on, she connected us through LinkedIn, but it was a former client of mine who connected us around this idea of generations. And Gabby and Catherine had this amazing idea to do this generations panel, which is going to be coming up by the time we get this episode out, we would have probably had it already. But I'm just super excited because we're going to talk about generations, why Gabby got into this. So let me start with a little bit of intro to Gabby and who she is. So Gabby Rosely is an ex-college swimmer turned speaker and communications consultant who helps organizations bridge communication gaps to improve engagement, collaboration, and performance across generations, and loves camping. Oh, I love that. I'm also a fellow, love communication. I have a degree in communication. So that's, I think, another reason we're so connected, Gabby.
Yes.
As a Gen Z leader who managed boomers through Gen Z at 21, Gabby learned firsthand how miscommunication can derail even the most talented teams. After initially struggling to connect across age groups, she discovered the strategies that transformed her team's performance and now teaches these methods to organizations nationwide. She most enjoys helping others leverage their unique gifts and strengths to achieve their goals and live fulfilled lives. Gabby has delivered 28 plus keynotes, workshops, and executive coaching programs for organizations like Criminal Defense Attorneys of Michigan, Biohackers World, and Illinois Association for Behavioral Health. She's trained with Gallup Certified Strengths Advisor and is trained in executive coaching. Okay, so I love the bios because it gives the audience a way to just wrap their heads around who we're talking about. But I also love a background beyond the bio. So what led you, give us in some more words, what led you to this of, okay, I'm understanding that there's these differences in generations, but I want to help people with this.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for reading my bio. I know sometimes it's a little lengthy. It's the one that I use for speaker stuff and all those shenanigans. So when I was asked to give my first keynote, it was actually asked of me to touch on the generations. And prior to that, I hadn't really delved into the research side of things. It was just experience, research based, because when I was hired for that management role at 21, I had to learn, trial by fire of everybody not trusting me to do my job. I'm 21 years old, and people are like, are you qualified to lead this team? And what do you know? You just graduated college, all valid questions and concerns. But I had to learn, the executive presence as a Gen Zer, but then I also had to learn how to both communicate, but also effectively lead all of the different generations because my team had boomers through Gen Zers. And so I started to notice the differences in personality types. And then when I started to kind of put people in the cohorts of the generations, things started to click because of the different worldviews that the generations have formed based on their flashbulb memories and the different value systems that they hold. That really came clear to me when I was doing my research for this keynote. So now it's been a long time coming into where I'm at now because of the research that has also supplemented my experience. So yeah, it's been a journey.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I want to dive right into that because, obviously I work in organizations a lot, not necessarily specifically in the generation space, but I hear it a lot when we're talking about culture and leadership. And things that I hear is just, some of the stereotypes, which I know you and I have talked about before, which we're going to talk about in the panel, some of the stereotypes, but also just I think the understanding, the communication, and then just one of the things I hear is, as certain generations are getting ready to retire, that there's this gap, this transfer gap knowledge where there's not all this information being shared. So there's all this is such a conversation right now. But one of the things I want to start with is how you felt. So to be leading a team because I know I've coached leaders like this before, who they have people who either been at the company for a really long time or they're much older than them, and now they're tasked with leading them. So give us a little glimpse into how you felt and how you even worked through that.
Yeah, it was intimidating because I was dealing with my own imposter syndrome. And so I think young leaders can really resonate with that. New leaders in general. So even if you have been a leader at a company prior to a new position you've taken on, you might have a little imposter syndrome. It's a new role, new responsibilities, a new team. You got to make first impressions. So there's sometimes self-doubt that creeps in regardless of your age. But for me, I had this imposter syndrome that was then reinforced by people who were actively, whether it was kind of giving a little bit of an attitude or like questioning things on the spot. And so it was a struggle for sure, because I had to come face to face with some of the things that were deeper seated emotions that maybe I hadn't wrestled with as predominantly as I was being forced to in that role. So that was a journey of an inward as well as an outward expression. And then I will say that it really was an opportunity for me to humble myself, because I kind of grew up with this competitive swimmer's mentality where it was like, be the best. And, you grind and you work hard, and it's like you showcase yourself, and it's really awesome when you get the title or you win the race or whatever. And so I definitely, I don't want to say it was an ego trip, but it was an opportunity for me to be like, hey, people are questioning me for valid reasons. And so whenever I work with Gen Z leaders or Gen Z executives in general, I always remind them that people are questioning you not because you're not capable, but because they don't know you're capable yet, and that's valid. They don't know you, they don't know your experiences, and so to humble yourself to say, hey, it's actually not expected of people to know what I bring to the table. It's up to me to prepare the team to have the conversations, to step into some of the things that are going to help me to lead them effectively. So it was an opportunity to humble myself as well, and then lastly, I'll say it was a learning experience that I was able to transfer to my relationships outside of work as well. When I started to recognize the stereotypes that I was falling victim to, like the assumptions that I was making about people, when I became really clear about that in a professional setting, I was like, how many times do I hop on the phone with my grandma and expect that she's not going to understand what I'm trying to tell her in this story because I think she's an old head or whatever, Like, so it was interesting to draw those same kinds of connections in my personal relationships as well.
And I want to definitely get into some of those misconceptions and stereotypes, because I know this is something that you help people with, you've researched. But first, I'm just curious, because as you're talking about now, I'm of the mindset that I don't necessarily want to go back and look at mistakes and like change them, because I think those are the things that help us grow. But I do think it's interesting to look back and be like, ooh, I would have done that differently. So like, knowing what you know now, what would you have told your younger, like 21-year-old self? Or is there a situation that you were like, wow, if I could go back now, I would have handled that a lot differently?
The first thing that comes to mind is to call it like others see it. So if I would have just taken that initiative to be like, I know what you guys are thinking, instead of trying to beat around the bush almost and like prove myself without really identifying the reason why I felt I needed to prove myself, if that makes sense. So calling it out and being like, listen guys, it is totally normal that you are questioning why I am in this position right now. I just came out of college. I just, this is my first time in a management role, but here's what I do know. Here's what I have done. So instead of trying to prove myself without talking about the elephant in the room, I would have just been very clear and upfront about that. I also would have probably initiated more feedback conversations from the jump so that I could have heard from diverse perspectives and different generations from the get-go, so that I could have built the relationships and started to identify the differences in the different cohorts and then apply them to my leadership style. But again, like you said, I don't think that I would be in the position that I'm in today if I hadn't failed miserably the first, couple of months in my role, right? And then came back out on the other side. So
I love that. I mean, obviously, because this is work you do, have that level of self-awareness, but I love that awareness to just go and that just like calling it out. Because I know I see that a lot with people as well, where they're trying to mask their insecurity around it and the imposter, and it's coming off. Usually if someone's having that, they usually come off way too strong and like heavy-handed because they're trying to prove themselves, or they come off like too timid and mild and they're not being a leader. And then it's almost reinforcing what they thought people were thinking. So I love that tip for you, for someone to say, just kind of put it on the table and like call it out to say, hey, this might be what you're thinking. This is what maybe I would be thinking if I was you, but here's what I can bring.
Exactly. And I'm also just curious, in the clients that you work with, is that something that tends to come up often in all age groups, or do you notice that in your younger clients with the imposter syndrome and kind of maybe that insecurity in the leadership role?
I notice it in all of them. And that's what I think is so interesting is when I was growing in my career in an organization, I remember looking at executives and being like, they have it all together. They feel like they know what they're doing, they're confident. And now getting to coach like high level executives, even like C-suite, they also have it. It's just what I found is that they found more tools to deal with it. But they still, in my experience, have you experienced that as well?
1000%. And that's why I
Yeah.
asked, because I could have guessed, but as a Gen Zer, I have that same kind of outlook, in at least I did in the beginning with the corporate world, where it was like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything. I'm just, I'm running around like a chicken with its head cut off, but everybody kind of feels like a chicken with their head cut off every now and again. And so I think, yeah, it's important to know that you're not alone as a young leader, but you're also not alone if you're an older leader and you're struggling with imposter syndrome, or you're struggling with any of those fears or doubts.
And I think you called it a great point right there because already we're acknowledging like if someone is, a more seasoned leader and they're like, well, I should have it all figured out. Like, okay, it makes sense that the younger generations, the newer leaders will have this. But if there's this, misconception that more seasoned leaders don't have it, then they're going to keep it bottled in anyways. And it's going to get in the way because they're not owning that that could be a thing. So what are some of the, through working with teams, through the research, things like that, what are some of the kind of misconceptions, or what are some of the things that people get wrong if you want to go through the different generations, or more even just like when working with different generations, like what are we getting wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start with boomers, and then we can go down from there. So you've heard the term, okay, boomer, like you've heard, oh yeah, they don't know how to use a phone, or they don't know how to use technology. So I would say the biggest misconception with boomers is that they are completely resistant to change, specifically technology. I think that people assume that boomers aren't going to be down with a new update. And some of them, it might be like, oh, this is frustrating. I was used to an old software, but they are adaptable because they value growth and they value achievement as well. So if that's going to help them in their position, they're probably more open to it than you would think. In fact, a lot of boomers that I have worked with in the last year or two are some of the most excited about AI, which is really interesting. And so I would say that eliminating that they don't like technology and they're averse to all change. And then for Gen X, they get the rap that they're the super skeptical and very like they're realists. They're super direct and super straightforward. So I have noticed a lot of people making assumptions that Gen X don't like their coworkers because of the way that they email or the way that they engage even in meetings. They are very direct and they're very straightforward. So a lot of people think that Gen X would prefer to be completely on an island, which is, there's a time and a place for that, right? They really appreciate when they have clear individual contributions so that then they can do their work. They hate being micromanaged, but oftentimes we perceive that as not wanting to be a part of the team environment, not wanting to be in relationship with the other team members. But that's not true at all. That's just how they communicate. They're very pragmatic and they're solution and that kind of focus oriented. And so they might not have as much I guess, deliberation as millennials or Gen Zers, but they still enjoy being a part of the team and they still want to participate. For millennials, because I think millennials are a really interesting generation. They're similar to Gen Z in a lot of ways, but they're also different. I think a lot of people make assumptions that millennials are hypersensitive, like they can't have the hard conversations and you can't give feedback to millennials. At least that's what I've heard from the older leaders that are working with millennials. And it's actually the opposite, because millennials are very, very open to all forms of feedback. They really appreciate when feedback is delivered immediately. They don't want it to wait until the quarterly review. Like, people try to avoid conversations with millennials because they don't want to hurt feelings, but then the millennials end up feeling like, okay, well, I thought that I was doing right all along, and then now you kind of blindsiding me, and now this kind of like robs me of trust in you. And so assuming that they're too sensitive to be able to deliver feedback, don't do that. And then for Gen Zers, we have this assumption that Gen Z is entitled and lazy. Those are the two biggest adjectives that come up when I work with older leaders that are struggling to connect with Gen Zers. They're like, well, they don't want to work hard, and they think that the world owes them everything or whatever. So it's this entitlement that comes through. And what I would say to that is that Gen Z is one of the most hardworking generations, the most innovative and the most entrepreneurial generation that we've ever seen. But the way that they define hard work is probably, in fact, it is very different than the way that boomers or Gen Xers defined hard work. So instead of working 10 hours a day, it might look like, okay, I'm going to work really, really hard and I'm going to do nothing but that at home on my laptop at my desk for 5 hours. And I might work 2 hours on a Saturday, but then I'm going to go off and I'm going to do something that gives me the passion and the fire to be able to show up again at work on Monday. And so less burnout in that case. And then with the entitlement also for Gen Z, they know what they want to do. And oftentimes Gen Z wants to know that the work that they're doing has positive impact and purpose. And so when that is not clear, Gen Z are kind of the generation that's starting to speak up about certain things where it's like, this actually doesn't feel aligned with me. And that is, there's always a time and a place to expand on, well, what does that really mean? And how can you step up and expand your comfort zone? But because they're very clear, their yeses are their yeses and their nos are their nos. And I think that that's a very empowering way to interact with the world. But sometimes the older generations can perceive that as entitlement.
I love that. Like, thank you for giving us that little like synopsis. And for those of you listening, probably you're nodding your head either to the generation you're in or the other generations of the kind of stereotypes or the perceptions that you have for them. Because I know, I feel like there's many people relate to all of the different categories, all the different generations and different times. But I know I can think of people in my head who are in a different generation who I'm like, oh yeah, I've thought that before. So I love that just like, so when you share this with people, so in a workshop or talking in a speech or when you're working with people, do you find that they're open to having those open conversations and saying where they feel like, saying like, I think Gen Z's, even if there's Gen Z's in the room, like I feel like they're entitled and lazy. And so do you feel like they're open to saying those things? And do you also feel like they're open to receiving how they're themselves and their generation could be perceived?
I would say 90% of the time, yes. There's always people that I have in workshops that are actually, I'm really glad when they do come up and they share, some of their qualms about what it is that we're talking about or dissecting. And those people tend to come at it from a point where it's like, who cares what generation you're in? You're just a human being or you just have this. And I always say that there is a lot of value in starting with the generational cohorts, but we don't finish there. It's a great place to scratch the surface because of the way that the historical events that shape the worldviews in childhood and youth, upbringing, young adulthood, shape the way that they show up in their relationships in the world, in their communities, in the workplace, everything like that. But I do find that when I facilitate discussions, I ask very specific questions and I tend to lead with sharing my own examples that then make it more likely for other people to feel open to sharing. I will also put people on the spot of I'm going to call on you and we're going to sit here in silence until you answer. So I make people uncomfortable in my workshops, and that is very difficult for some people. And when I say uncomfortable, I mean uncomfortable at first, and then you start to ease into it because we're always going to be in a safe environment, of course. But I really do urge people to share. And I don't ever say like, hey, I want you to call somebody on your team out. Like, we're not going to use names. We're not going to attack anybody. This is not a personal attack. This is an opportunity to share where you are struggling and then identify what is in your control. How is your perspective potentially altering the way you're interacting with this coworker or with this situation at work? And how can we shift that from a place of deeper understanding and deeper connection with the people that you're working with, clients or team members? And it tends to start slow and then it tends to ripple, and it's like, now we're talking about the really, really important work that needs to be done. That's where we start. It's not where we finish.
I love that. And so if someone's listening right now, because I do agree, I feel like I see a big split, and there's certain organization, there's certain people who see the importance of having these conversations and calling some of these things out. And then at the same time, I can see people are like, we don't have time for that. We got to get to business. We got to do that. So what is the result when people actually embrace this, when they actually take the time to learn about the different generations, what they bring to the table, hold up a mirror to your own biases around it and put the work in to improve communication? What are some of the things that you see happen as a result?
One of the things that I think is so important to mention, and it's a buzzword nowadays in the corporate world, is engagement. And really what engagement means is that we feel a personal attachment or connection to the why or the vision of a company. We feel like we are playing a role in a bigger purpose. We're a part of the team and we matter. Right? That's what engagement is. And we can increase engagement when we're connected to our strengths and our skills and our talents, and we're directly contributing to that vision on a team. And so whenever we do work about the generations, everybody likes to learn about themselves. Everybody likes to talk about themselves. That's why people really enjoy reading horoscopes. And that's why human design is beautiful. That's why numerology is beautiful. That's why all of these things are really great. That's why the Myers-Briggs is awesome. That's why Clifton Strengths is awesome. Because when we can talk about ourselves, it is deeply fulfilling, not because it's coming from an ego place, but it's coming from wow, now I can interpret my behaviors and my actions, and I can actually maybe have more compassion with myself, and then I can have more compassion with other people. And so when we open the door to have these kinds of conversations, then we start to see people who are like, wow, I actually, my perspective is honored and appreciated here. And, my ideas actually do hold value. And because I'm from this generation, I might have a different outlook, and that actually helps contribute to the vision. And it's, a more collective, ideology moving forward towards this shared goal. And so then there's this inspiration, which then it's like, okay, now I feel a little bit more comfortable to share what I might be struggling with, and then we can start to do the work that helps us feel like, okay, I'm not just glossing over problems, we're actually working together, and now this feels like it's I don't know, it's like a work in progress. It's a really interesting thing. With mental health, there has to be some sort of tension that is where you are and where you want to go. And so we have to be able to open up the floor for those kinds of conversations. It doesn't mean it's just going to be peaceful all the time. And usually if it looks like that, it's fake peace. And so these kinds of conversations are what help to bring that tension alive and into the room. And that's actually what helps to build engagement, which then boils down to increased productivity, reduced turnover, increased retention, increased profitability, all of that great stuff that makes a business successful.
I love that. And I'm like, yes, these are the things, like knowing that we're in the same, it's like getting teams and organizations and people to understand that this isn't just like fluff work. This isn't just like, feel good stuff. And when you can make the connection and the tie to like, yes, engagement scores and retention, how much it costs to replace somebody if they leave because they don't feel connected, and productivity, like there's so much value in it, and it's getting people to understand that this might be at the root. And as you were talking about what do people get out of this, the words that came up for me was just like helping people feel seen. Like when they can talk about themselves, it's helping them feel seen. And then the other thing I thought of as you were talking was it does make it less of a personal attack on somebody when you can understand why they're operating that way. That it's not they don't respect you, they don't value you, or that they just are trying to get under your skin, or that they're lazy, whatever it might be. It's that it's how they grew up. They grew up with a different perspective, they have different values. And so in the work that you do, it's so important to help people to realize that it's not a personal thing. Like, Gabby and I are in different generations. It's not that I'm trying to undermine her, she's trying to, whatever it is. It's just that we have different lenses that we're viewing things through. We've lived through different things.
Yes, I could not have said that better. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it's funny how often in the workshops that I facilitate, sometimes we use humor to diffuse tension in a situation. And that's great. And I do that all the time. And I think it's actually a great tool. But sometimes when we start to uncover, it's like, oh, millennials value this, or, you might notice a millennial on your team doing this, or you might notice a Gen Xer going off into their office to do everything by themselves, closing their door and shutting everybody out until 5 p.m., blah, blah, ha, ha, ha. Then what I start to notice is people on the team being like, oh, Alicia, so this is why you do X, Y, and Z. Ha ha ha. And it's like, yeah, man, I'm not taking it personally. This is just how I think. And then we start to apply this humor from that lens of understanding where it's like, oh, wait, I was actually upset for no reason, or I was thinking that you were out to get me for no reason or whatever. And so, yeah, that's really powerful.
I love that. How have you seen this change like in your personal life? So if people are listening right now and they're like, okay, I don't really have that many different generations or I'm not in that type of environment, but how have you seen this, enhance your own personal life if people can get this understanding about the different generations?
I'm so glad that you asked that because whenever I give a keynote, the caveat is like, if you're not in corporate or if you don't work on a multi-generational team, this is going to help you with your mother-in-law. This is going to help you with your grandma. This is going to help you with your son, with your daughter, whatever. And so starting to understand what people value helps you to pique your curiosity and want to get to know them on a deeper level within the framework of what maybe they feel most comfortable talking about. But it allows you to open up your heart to say, what can I find about this person that might be different from myself that I could learn from, but also grow to really enjoy interacting with? Because Vanessa Van Edwards, she's one of my favorite communication experts, and she has actually done a study that found that the most popular people aren't the ones that are liked the most by other people. The most popular people are actually those that like the highest number of people. So if we can find reasons to like other people, to get along with other people, to appreciate other people, then we have better relationships. But we're just, I guess, viewed as more popular. I don't think that's maybe the right way to go about it. Like you don't need to be popular with your grandma and grandpa, but it does help you to learn and deepen those relationships when it's like, hey, you might have experienced this or you value this. Why? Or can you tell me a story? Or you know what I'm saying? So I think it really helps with that.
And I love the words that I just jotted that down of that word, like appreciation. It's just like finding ways to appreciate. I think this is a whole nother topic for another day, but just in general, as a society, as a human race, of like, how can we find more things that connect us as people versus all of the things that are, we're always looking for things to fight with people about. We're looking to pick a fight on social media, all of the things. And so this is no exception in the sense of like, it's just finding appreciation and realizing that you don't need to agree. Like you were just talking, it's like, just reminding you, you don't need to agree with everyone. We don't need to see exactly eye to eye. Like the way that you see things is probably different than your grandma or grandpa. You don't need to agree with them. You need to appreciate and respect like their perspective.
Yes. And I want to also mention, it's funny how this has come up in a couple of different keynotes that I've done. I'll have people come up to me afterward and they're like, oh, wow, I really understand my mother-in-law a lot better now. So like tense relationships as well. When you're not, like you mentioned earlier, taking something as a personal attack, and maybe you're just interpreting it as, okay, this is their communication style. So if you're direct and I'm bubbly and I start to perceive you as being a little bit like rugged, do you have an attitude, or are you just communicating the way that you communicate? And so from the understanding perspective, then it helps you to, I guess, alleviate some of the pressure that you're placing on the other person to communicate the way that you most resonate with, and deeming that as the only right way or the only kind way, or making assumptions about attitude is, that's not gonna help anybody out in the long run. So
yeah, I love that. What is one thing, like, of course, if we could tell everyone, like, hey, bring Gabby in and do this multi-generational, thing. But if someone's just like listening to this and they're like, wow, I am on a team like this. There is someone who's in a different generation that I'm struggling with, or maybe it's a personal thing. Like, what would be one small thing that they could do to just get started to help kind of bridge that gap?
I would say start with your own assumptions and think about how you view the other generations. Like when I am, I don't know, having a conversation with a boomer, what's starting to come up for me? How do I change the way that I talk when I'm having a conversation with a Gen Zer? What do I do differently? And why might I do that? What are the underlying beliefs that I hold about this generation or this person that might be influencing the way that I'm showing up in this conversation? So starting with your own assumptions is really helpful. And then let's say you're not a decision maker on the team in terms of like a leadership, somebody who would be able to hire a consultant or someone like me to come in and facilitate a workshop or a program. You can start to have one-on-one conversations, and you can start with curiosity with your coworkers, maybe your closer coworkers on the team. And you start to ask like, hey, I heard this podcast and I noticed that I start to make these assumptions about Gen Zers or Gen Xers. Have you ever found yourself communicating with our clients or different people on our team differently because of their age? Like, have you ever noticed that? And then you start the conversation, and that curiosity has a ripple effect. But I definitely would say that having a third party who is unbiased about the dynamics of your team is extremely beneficial. And so the workshops that I do, and I know the people who have been a part of the workshops oftentimes say that we don't know if we could have opened some of up these scary doors if we didn't have someone holding the space for it. So definitely start slowly if you don't have someone guiding you.
I love that word too, that curiosity. It's like one of my favorite words. It's one of the words that whenever I'm talking to clients too, that's one that they like grab onto. It's like, how can we go into situations and conversations with more curiosity? Because just even the word itself like starts to bring down the walls. So I love that those tips that you just shared. So if you're listening and you're like, what can I do right now? Like, yes, I'm having, I have multi-generational team, or I'm having issues with someone on my team, or I have someone in my personal life. Just, take what Gabby said. Start with your own assumptions, like what, stereotypes might you have, how might you be viewing them? And then also just starting that conversation and going in with curiosity, even asking them like, hey, this is how I approach challenges. I'm noticing that you approach things differently. Like, so even just, I love that tip. And then just kind of, as we start to wrap up here, I'm just going to like pivot a little bit away from the generations, because I always love to hear this too. Like, obviously, you're a speaker, you do coaching, you do workshops, you've got all these things, you do podcasting. What's just something that's exciting you about this year that you've got coming up?
So on Friday, actually, I leave for a 90-day intensive coaching program, and our first in-person skills lab is in Atlanta this weekend. So that is like super high on my radar because it's literally coming up this weekend. So that is more under the professional scope. So I'm very excited about that. And so that would be work related. But I would say for just my personal life, because of course, my work being a solopreneur right now is a really big part of my life. And I don't really believe in work-life balance. I believe in work-life harmony. But I am a really big traveler. And so as I start to plan for my trips in the upcoming months and the summertime, I'm getting pumped. I am going to be going to Banff in Canada for the first time this summer, and I'm super excited. It's going to be a siblings trip with my my brother and my sister. We're going to go out there. We're going to do some hiking, and we're going to see all the beautiful, Instagram worthy,
cool.
all the places. So that'll be great. And then I'll be heading out to Costa Rica in less than a month now for an intensive retreat in the jungle, which I'm super, super excited for. So that's going to be awesome.
Oh my goodness. I love Costa Rica. I've only been there once, and I cannot wait to go back. My husband and I went, and I still think about how great it is.
It's one of my favorite countries. I spent 4 months there in 2024. I did a volunteer exchange and fell in love with it. So yeah, if you have a chance to go to Costa Rica, you should go.
Yeah, there's our plug. Like we should have some brand partnership here with like a travel agency for Costa Rica. But that's so amazing. I love to just hear what people are excited about. So and I totally agree with you. I, as a small business owner, and I think most people too, is that work-life balance is, that idea isn't as much a thing more. So I always call it like work-life integration, or I love the harmony and I think that is also a generational thing. That's what's interesting, is I think that, some of these other generations, it's different, where we're used to being able to have the flexibility. It's like, yeah, I'm going to work hard, but that might look like I'm working couple hours during the day, and then I'm going to take a walk outside, and then I might have to work some at night or on the weekend, but that allows me that flexibility. Like, for me, flexibility is a big thing. And so I just love even to hear these examples, right, of doing that. So I know that people are going to be listening to this, and they're going to be wanting to have more Gabby in their life. So Gabby, where can people find you and connect with you after listening to this episode?
This has been so fun. I've loved this so much. So I'm really active on LinkedIn. So just my first and last name on LinkedIn, Gabby Rosely. And then you can find my website through my LinkedIn bio, or you can search my website, which is gabbyrosely.com. And so I am taking on some new clients for executive coaching programs and for sporadic team development workshops. I also speak at keynotes across the country. So if you're interested in that, you can request a quote through my website. And you can also just send me a DM on LinkedIn. I am very responsive. So even if it's not a, hey, I want to work with you or I want to hire you, it's like, hey, I listened to this episode and I have a story I'd like to share or maybe a question. I would love, love, love to connect. So feel free to engage on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Amazing. I really appreciate, I think I love this conversation. I feel like we could probably talk about like 10 other different topics as well. So thank you so much for hopping on, for sharing this with us. I know I always write down notes. Like I feel like I use guest episodes as like my own personal development of all the things that I want to learn. Cause I'm like, oh yeah. So thank you for the tips. And those of you listening, remember to go back, listen to this episode and start those conversations, get curious and show Gabby some love by after you listen to this episode. One of the best things you can do for us is to just share it out, let people know so that we can get more people understanding the different generations. Send her a message, send me a message, let us know what you liked about the episode. And I guess I'm just going to leave it with, just get curious and be curious. So thank you, Gabby.
Of course. Thanks, Julie.